Ingrid Bergman, the luminous star of Casablanca, once wrote something so stunning in her private memoir that it left even old Hollywood historians speechless. She said of Gregory Peck, her spellbound co-star Gregory Peck was massive in every sense of the word. But what exactly did she mean? Tell us in the comments. Do you believe stars like Gregory Peck lived secret lives behind the spotlight? Type 1 for yes, 0 for no below. A screen icon. Ingrid Bergman was a screen icon, but her personal life, far from the poise and elegance of her on-screen roles, was a winding path of love, risk, heartbreak, and defiance. In 1937, at the age of 22, she married Peter Lindström, a serious, respected Swedish neurosurgeon. Their union seemed almost a tale of contrasts he rooted in the clinical precision of science. She in the ephemeral world of film. At first, their marriage offered a kind of sanctuary, a counterbalance to the dizzying pace of her rising stardom. 1 year later, they welcomed their daughter Pia. For a brief moment, Ingrid's life seemed perfectly composed. A successful actress, a stable marriage, a young child. But inside, fault lines were forming. The deeper she dove into her work, first in Sweden, then Hollywood, and eventually the world, the more the divide between her professional life and her personal one widened. By the 1940s, she was an international sensation, captivating audiences with her luminous presence in films like Casablanca, Gaslight, and Notorious. But behind the glamour, she found herself increasingly distant from the quiet domestic life she had once shared with Lindström. The roles she portrayed, strong, conflicted women who wrestled with their hearts, reflected something stirring within her own soul. Then came Roberto Rossellini. Their meeting was fate disguised as coincidence. Bergman, deeply moved by his neorealist films, had written him a letter expressing her admiration and her hope to work with him. She likely had no idea that the letter would ignite not only a cinematic collaboration but a firestorm of love, passion, and upheaval. When they finally met, the connection was electric, creative, and emotional. Rossellini was everything her husband was not: tempestuous, artistic, a man who lived as boldly as she longed to. They began an affair while she was still married, a decision that would redefine the course of her life and stain her reputation for years to come. In 1950, she became pregnant with Rossellini's child. The world reacted with fury. The woman who had once embodied virtue and grace on screen was suddenly labeled a fallen star, even a pariah. The U.S. Senate denounced her. Churches condemned her. Fan mail turned to hate mail. Her marriage to Lindström ended in divorce, and her ties to Hollywood were severed. But Ingrid Bergman did not crumble. She gave birth to her daughter Isabella in 1952, not in shame, but in strength. She stood by her choices. She married Rossellini and went on to have 2 more children, twins, Ingrid and Roberto Jr., with him. Together, they made films that defied tradition, often misunderstood but fiercely authentic. Their marriage, like their art, was passionate and volatile. Eventually, the cracks grew too deep and they too parted ways. But Bergman never regretted following her heart. She had paid dearly for that decision, but it was hers. And for a woman of her time, that was nothing short of revolutionary. In later years, Bergman returned to Hollywood, reclaimed her career, and won a second Academy Award. But more than awards or applause, what she had earned was something far rarer: the right to live truthfully. Through marriages, divorces, motherhood, exile, and illness, Ingrid Bergman remained a woman of grace and steel. She once said, "Be yourself. The world worships the original." She lived that philosophy fully, even when it cost her everything. Divorce from Peter Lindström. Following the birth of Isabella in 1952, Ingrid Bergman made one of the most difficult decisions of her life. She finalized her divorce from Peter Lindström in 1950, ending a marriage that had lasted 13 years. It was not just the end of a union, it was the end of a version of herself, the woman who had once tried to walk the line between fame and domesticity. Her decision to leave that behind to follow her heart, despite the tidal wave of public condemnation, marked her as both vilified and free. Shortly afterward, she and Roberto Rossellini married in Mexico, in a ceremony far from Hollywood and Stockholm, but symbolically close to the radical life they were creating together. It wasn't just a marriage of passion. It was a merger of two restless spirits. Two artists who believed in the power of truth both on the screen and in life. Italy became Bergman's new home, Rossellini her compass, and their work together, a series of deeply personal, often divisive films, a reflection of their inner world. Together, they had two more children, Roberto Ingmar Rossellini, born in 1954, and Isotta Ingrid. Rossellini, born in 1956. Bergman, once an actress celebrated for her poised elegance, was now living a life that was anything but polished. It was raw, chaotic, creative, and real. She was a mother of four, a wife and a woman fighting to redefine herself in the aftermath of scandal. Yet the fire that drew Bergman and Rossellini together eventually became the fire that consumed them. Their artistic visions began to clash. Cultural differences created gaps they could not always bridge. Rossellini, deeply rooted in Italian neo-realism, was uncompromising in his work. Bergman, though devoted, was an international star navigating a fractured identity, Swedish by birth, Italian by marriage, American by fame. The relentless media spotlight still glowing from their earlier scandal only added pressure to an already complex union. By 1957, after years of trying to hold both their creative and domestic lives together, Bergman and Rossellini divorced. It was the end of a passionate but turbulent chapter. They had loved each other fiercely, worked together ambitiously, and raised 3 children, but love, even when profound, is not always enough. Only a year later, in 1958, Bergman once again opened her heart to love marrying Lars Schmidt, a Swedish theatrical producer with a deep understanding of the world she had once belonged to, and perhaps the world she longed to return to. With Schmidt, there was no scandal, no public disgrace. Instead, there was stability, quiet companionship, and an anchor in her home country. Their marriage lasted nearly 2 decades until 1975. During this time, Schmidt helped Bergman reconnect with the stage, promoting her theatrical work across Europe and supporting her artistic aspirations away from the tabloid frenzy. For many years, theirs was a calm harbor after the storm. But even calm seas can give way to drifting tides. Over time, their bond too began to dissolve, not with the explosive intensity of her earlier breakups, but with the quiet resignation that sometimes accompanies long relationships. Their eventual divorce in 1975 marked the end of her final marriage. Ingrid Bergman confesses he was massive. It was 1944. The world was at war, but inside Hollywood's Golden Gates another drama was unfolding. Director Alfred Hitchcock was preparing to film Spellbound, a psychological thriller starring 2 of the biggest names in cinema, Ingrid Bergman and Gregory Peck. She was Sweden's international treasure, elegant, married, untouchable. He was rising fast, stoic, rugged, and heartbreakingly handsome. From the moment the cameras rolled, sparks flew. But it was what happened off-camera that would leave a permanent mark on both of them. When Ingrid Bergman spoke of Gregory Peck in her memoir, she didn't merely refer to his physical stature, though that in itself was unforgettable. He was massive, she wrote, and the word lingered like a breath held too long. It was not just about his height or shoulders that seemed sculpted for epic roles. The phrase carried the weight of something remembered not only with the eyes, but with the skin, the heart. It was awe. It was admiration, and something more intimate, unspoken, that hinted at an emotional enormity she couldn't reduce to mere description. Physically, Gregory Peck embodied the idealized masculinity of mid-century Hollywood, tall, broad-shouldered, impossibly handsome. But, unlike others who wore their strength like armor, Peck's presence was not about dominance. It was about anchoring. He was not loud, he was still. Not arrogant, just certain. Bergman, no stranger to legendary co-stars, had stood opposite giants. And yet, when she spoke of Peck, there was an almost reverent hush in her tone. He didn't enter a room, she recalled, he filled it. He filled it not just with his stature, but with his calm. He brought with him a kind of moral weight, a centeredness that made chaos seem momentarily far away. She remembered how even in the hurried frenzy of a production set, when Peck was present, people listened more carefully, spoke more truthfully. It wasn't just his physicality that lingered. It was the clarity of his spirit. He had a gravity about him, Bergman wrote, as if the very air listened when he spoke. She wasn't romanticizing. She was bearing witness. There was something old-souled in him, something that made frivolity wilt and sincerity bloom. You couldn't lie to him, she confessed. He had eyes that saw through you, not to judge, but to understand, to see you as you were. And in that gaze you found yourself wanting to be more honest, more human. The heat behind the cool. Their time working together on screen and off was marked by a tension that hovered delicately between professional admiration and something far more elusive and unspoken chemistry that neither dared name aloud. There were moments, Bergman admitted, when I'd look at him across a scene and I would forget my lines not out of nervousness but because I was genuinely transported by the man before me. It wasn't lust, she clarified. It was deeper than that. It was reverence, a quiet, involuntary surrender to the gravity he exuded. He seemed carved out of something timeless, she wrote, not merely handsome, but substantial. A man who made the moment slow down just by standing in it. What struck her even more than his presence was his lack of ego. In an industry built on vanity, Gregory Peck remained grounded, almost definitely so. He never needed to be the loudest voice in the room, Bergman wrote. His silence often said more than 100 speeches. She remembered how seriously he approached his work not for acclaim, but because he believed that acting at its best was a form of truth-telling. He believed in goodness, she reflected, not the soft, idealized kind, but the kind you earn, the kind you fight for, scene after scene. To work beside him was to be called to a higher standard, not through instruction but by example. He made her feel seen in a way that few ever had, not as an actress or icon, but as a person. He left an imprint on me, she confessed, not just as an actor, as a woman. On screen, they were restrained, polished. But behind the scenes, Ingrid would later write in her memoir, he kissed me like he already knew me, like he had been waiting to. Ingrid was married. Gregory was engaged. But none of that mattered when they shared scenes late into the night. Rumors started on set, Hitchcock noticed, so did studio execs. But nothing prepared the public for what Ingrid wrote decades later. A love that couldn't be. Bergman confessed they had a full-blown affair. Not just a fling, a deep emotional connection that shook her to her core. They'd meet in secrecy, exchange letters, whisper plans to one day run away from Hollywood's glare. But Gregory, known for his moral rigidity, pulled away. He couldn't betray the image the studios had built for him. Heartbroken Ingrid wrote, he was massive in stature talent, and in the way he held my heart for a while. The memoir, No One Expected. Years later, Ingrid released her memoir, My Story. Buried within the polished pages were confessions the studio never wanted revealed. She didn't name Gregory explicitly, but fans knew. The timeline matched. The scenes were unmistakable. Hollywood insiders whispered this was her final love letter and her reckoning. Neither ever spoke of it publicly again. Gregory Peck remained a dignified icon. Ingrid moved through scandal and exile, yet never stopped remembering him. In the final chapter of her memoir, she writes, there are loves you remember, and then there are those that haunt you. Gregory was the latter. Their affair never made headlines back then. But her words later became one of old Hollywood's most heartbreaking footnotes. A life of career. Ingrid Bergman grew up in a world far removed from the glitter and illusion of show business. Born on August 29, 1915 in Stockholm, Sweden. Ingrid's life began with quiet promise. Her father, Justus Bergman, a Swedish artist and amateur photographer, captured much of her early childhood on film, moving portraits that would later haunt and comfort her in equal measure. Her mother, Friedel Adler, was of German descent, a warm presence that left too soon. Ingrid was only 3 when her mother died, and although the memory was faint, the absence lingered like a shadow over her young life. Her father became her world. It was he who nurtured her imagination, dressed her up in costumes, filmed her in playful poses, and introduced her to the power of the camera. He called her his little actress. But tragedy returned early. When Ingrid was just 12 years old, her father died of cancer, leaving her orphaned. She later said that losing him felt like losing the sun. After his death, Ingrid was passed between relatives some kind, some less so, and found herself living a life that was defined more by solitude than by affection. But it was during these quiet, often lonely years that something began to take root, a longing to express what she couldn't say aloud. She would watch people closely listen to the rhythm of their speech, observe the smallest gestures, and store it all inside. Ingrid's reserved nature masked a fierce intelligence and a deep emotional reservoir. She found refuge in books and eventually on the stage. At the age of 18, she enrolled in the Royal Dramatic Theatre School in Stockholm, the same prestigious institution that had once trained Greta Garbo. It was there, in the same hallowed halls, that Bergman began to discover her power not through grand speeches or melodrama, but through restraint, nuance, and honesty. She was a revelation from the beginning. Her instructors noted her ability to convey a universe of emotion with a single glance. Her classmates sensed that she was not acting. She was living each moment truthfully. While many of her peers chased theatricality, Ingrid chased authenticity. Swedish filmmakers soon took notice. By the mid-1930s, she was appearing in films that drew critical praise. Her breakout role came in Intermezzo, where she played a young piano teacher who falls in love with a married violinist. The film was tender, beautifully shot, and anchored by Bergman's luminous performance. It was enough to catch the attention of one of Hollywood's most influential producers, David O. Selznick. Selznick saw in Ingrid what the American screen was missing: naturalism. While most actresses in Hollywood at the time were sculpted into starlets, made-up, manicured, and media-trained, Bergman arrived with barely a trace of artifice. She didn't speak perfect English. She had no interest in changing her name, her nose, or her accent. And she flatly refused to pluck her eyebrows. When asked why, she famously replied, "I want to be myself." In 1939, Selznick brought her to Los Angeles to star in the American remake of Intermezzo, this time opposite the elegant Leslie Howard. The film was a quiet triumph. Audiences were mesmerized by her authenticity, and critics praised her as a fresh, honest presence in an industry increasingly defined by illusion. Among Ingrid Bergman's most iconic and enduring performances is her portrayal of Ilse Lund in Casablanca, opposite Humphrey Bogart. In that unforgettable role, Bergman embodied a woman torn between past and present, between a love that still smoldered and a duty that called her elsewhere. Her luminous presence, especially in the smoke-laced shadows of Rick's Café Américain, gave the film its soul. Audiences around the world were captivated by the way she could convey heartbreak with the subtlest shift of expression, by how her eyes alone could tell an entire story. Casablanca would go on to become one of the most beloved and influential films in the history of cinema, and much of its timeless power can be traced to Bergman's performance. This was the golden period of Bergman's career, when her every role seemed to further cement her reputation as one of Hollywood's most gifted dramatic actresses. In 1944, she won her first Academy Award for Best Actress for Gaslight, a dark psychological thriller in which she portrayed Paula Alquist, a young wife being manipulated and mentally destabilized by her sinister husband. The term gaslighting, now commonly used to describe psychological manipulation, traces its cultural roots to this haunting performance. Bergman's depiction of a woman questioning her sanity while still clinging to dignity and strength was both harrowing and unforgettable. It remains one of the defining performances of the 1940s. She continued to showcase her extraordinary range with films such as Spellbound and Notorious, both directed by Alfred Hitchcock. In Notorious, she starred alongside Cary Grant in a complex tale of espionage and betrayal. Her portrayal of Alicia Huberman, a woman recruited to spy on Nazi sympathizers, was layered with moral ambiguity, sensuality, and quiet courage. Bergman never simply played characters, she inhabited them, revealing their flaws and fears with unflinching honesty. But just as her career reached its pinnacle, Bergman made a decision that would shock Hollywood and the world. In the late 1940s, she fell in love with Italian neo-realist director Roberto Rossellini and boldly followed her heart to Europe. Their collaboration, both romantic and artistic, began with the film Stromboli, a stark poetic exploration of isolation and survival. The film and their relationship caused an international scandal. Bergman, still married at the time, was denounced on the floor of the U.S. Senate and vilified in the American press. Her once spotless public image shattered overnight. Yet, despite the controversy, Bergman remained unwavering in her artistic convictions. She and Rossellini made several more films together, including Europa 51 and Journey to Italy, both of which would be poorly received at the time, but later hailed as masterworks of neorealist cinema. These films pushed narrative boundaries and prioritized emotional realism over conventional storytelling. Bergman's performances in them are raw, modern, and unflinchingly personal years ahead of their time. After several years of exile from the American film industry, Bergman made a triumphant return with Anastasia. Playing the role of a troubled woman who may or may not be the last surviving daughter of the Russian Tsar, Bergman brought gravity, grace, and mystery to the part. Her performance earned her a second Academy Award for Best Actress. More than just a professional victory. It was a moment of redemption, a welcome back to the country and the industry that had once cast her out. She continued to work steadily across the following decades, shifting fluidly between American and European projects from grand historical epics to intimate dramas. In 1974, she won her third Academy Award, this time for Best Supporting Actress in Sidney Lumet's star-studded mystery Murder on the Orient Express. Once again, her performance stood out a brief but emotionally devastating turn as a broken-hearted missionary nurse. In the final years of her career, Bergman ventured into television and stage with equal mastery. Her portrayal of Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir in the 1982 television miniseries A Woman Called Golda won her an Emmy Award and widespread praise. It was her last performance, completed just before her death, and it stands as a final testament to her ability to transform completely into any role she took on, whether royalty spy saint or stateswoman. Over the course of her remarkable career, Ingrid Bergman was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, winning 3. She also earned 2 Primetime Emmy Awards, a Tony Award, a BAFTA, and numerous honors across the globe. She acted in 5 languages: Swedish, English, German, Italian, and French, and worked with many of the greatest directors of the 20th century, including Alfred Hitchcock, Roberto Rossellini, Ingmar Bergman, no relation George Cukor and Sidney Lumet. But beyond all accolades, what truly set Ingrid Bergman apart was not just her beauty or talent, but her courage. She never allowed herself to be confined by the expectations of others. She defied Hollywood norms left at the height of her fame to pursue art and love, and returned with dignity and strength. Her life and work were marked by honesty, emotional depth, and an unshakable commitment to truth both on screen and off. She didn't just act, she illuminated. Struggle with breast cancer. Ingrid Bergman's life took a dramatic and unexpected turn during the theatrical run of The Constant Wife in London in the early 1970s. This turn of events occurred during these years. During this time, when she was still commanding stages with the same charisma that had long defined her film career, she became aware of a physical oddity, a hard lump under her left breast. This was a time when she was still very successful in her film career. Fast action was taken by Bergman, who was well known for her self-control and meticulous attention to detail, despite the fact that she was in the midst of a demanding performance schedule. In order to get the tumor removed, she went through surgery at a private facility in London on June 15, 1974. He opted to fight breast cancer with grace, bravery, and an unrelenting devotion to her profession, despite the fact that the procedure was kept relatively secret. This marked the beginning of a long and painful struggle with breast cancer, which she chose to fight with grace and courage. On the other hand, the cancer was not yet finished with her. Several years later, when Bergman was embroiled in the extremely taxing process of making Autumn Sonata, a film that would go on to become one of her most dramatic and highly praised performances, she once again had a lump that seemed to portend something bad. After making this second finding, she proceeded to make a hasty trip back to London, where she had yet another surgical procedure. Particularly significant was the experience that took place. She produced one of the most raw, complicated, and sensitive performances of her career under the direction of Ingrid Bergman in the film No Relation, which seemed to mirror the emotional hardships that she had experienced in her actual life. This particular performance took place even while her body was fighting a sickness that would ultimately be fatal. The tenacious attitude and persistent work ethic that Bergman displayed after the operation and rehabilitation allowed her to immediately begin rehearsals for Waters of the Moon, a television version that was produced in 1978. Bergman refused to let her sickness define or limit her in any way. Bergman continued to take on substantial parts despite the steady progression of her sickness. One of the most noteworthy roles she played in her late career was the depiction of Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir in the television drama A Woman Called Golda, which was released in 1981. The decision was both courageous and profoundly affecting. Meir's character was inhabited by Bergman with a tremendous sense of power and dignity, despite the fact that she was now fragile and her face had been transformed by treatments and time. She finished the project with the same level of professionalism that she is known for, despite the fact that filming was a difficult process and had a significant impact on her health. Following her death, she would be honored with Emmy and Golden Globe honors, which would serve as a conclusive confirmation of her illustrious career in the performance arts. The last moment. Immediately after this, Bergman resigned from her position on the public stage and moved into her flat in London, which was located in the prestigious district of Cheney Gardens, close to the River Thames. Although the neighborhood was well known for its artistic residents and its peaceful allure, Bergman found that it turned out to be a place of seclusion and quiet struggle for him. At that location, she started receiving chemotherapy treatments on a daily basis. As the sickness progressed, the once radiant celebrity who had enthralled millions of people now confronted it with a calm and collected demeanor. There were frequent gatherings of paparazzi and admirers outside of her building where they would camp out on the street in the hopes of catching a sight of the iconic actress. She avoided the front window, not just because she was aware of their presence, but also because she did not want them to see how diminished she was. Her body had been completely devastated by the sickness. Her 12th vertebrae had collapsed as a result of the cancer's spread to her spine, which resulted in her experiencing a significant deal of discomfort and a restriction of her movement. Her right lung had completely stopped working, and just a piece of her left lung was still functioning properly. But even in the most difficult of times, she never gave up her ability to draw power from inside. Ingrid Bergman, who was 67 years old at the time of her death, passed away suddenly in London on August 29, 1982, soon after midnight. We mourn her passing. In the presence of those she loved, she passed away without any pain or suffering. In addition to 3 other people, her former husband Lars Schmidt, a Swedish theatrical producer, was there at her bedside. She had maintained a cordial and emotional relationship with him throughout their marriage. It was an intimate and symbolic gesture full of bittersweet joy and imminent loss that they had celebrated a farewell glass in her honor that evening, only a few hours before she passed away. The Little Prince, a philosophical novella written by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, was a copy that was placed next to her bedtime reading. Towards the end of the book, which Bergman valued for its themes of innocence, loss, and the invisible essence of things, the book was opened to a page maybe as a final, calm reflection of her soul's journey. The traditional St. Martin-in-the-Fields Church in London was the location of her memorial ceremony, which took place in the month of October. An exquisite and mournful gathering was held, and 100-200 mourners from all around the world were there to pay their respects. Her 3 children, including Isabella Rossellini, who had already begun making her own impact in the film industry, as well as the extended Rossellini family and cousins who had traveled in from Sweden to bid farewell to one of their greatest stars, were among those who were present. Additionally, the event was attended by a remarkable group of accomplished individuals from the performing arts. A number of well-known actors and colleagues who had worked together for their whole careers, including Liv Ullmann, Sir John Gielgud, Dame Wendy Hiller, Birgit Nilsson, and Joss Ackland were there, and each paid homage in their own unique and unsaid manner. During the service, passages from Shakespeare were read out loud, which echoed Bergman's profound origins in the world of classical theater. This Old Man, a whimsical melody that was prominently included in The Inn of the Sixth Happiness and As Time Goes By, a profoundly nostalgic song that was immortalized by Bergman's own voice in Casablanca, a song that appeared to encompass the arc of her life and work, were among the musical selections that were played. On a later occasion, her grandson, Justin Daly, remembers the enormous commotion and emotion that occurred on that particular day. A large number of photographers rushed to the location competing for a position and flashing their cameras as mourners attempted to express their sorrow. During the chaos, Daly recalled getting hit on the head by a camera. However, in the midst of the sensations of pain and bewilderment, he had an abrupt and deep realization Ingrid Bergman was no longer just his grandma. He went on to say that despite all that was going on, I had the impression that she was more than simply my grandma. Everyone else considered her to be theirs. Indeed, she was a part of the planet. It was an opinion that was held by millions of people. In addition to being a mother, a grandma, and a friend, Ingrid Bergman was also a friend. The talent, bravery, and humanity that she possessed had left an indelible mark on every region of the world. She was a legend. Ingrid Bergman and Gregory Peck gave us one of the most stylish, haunting thrillers of the 1940s. But behind the film's iconic look lay a hidden love story. Quiet, painful, unforgettable. What do you think was Ingrid's confession a tribute, or a final plea for forgiveness? Let us know in the comments below. If you love true stories from classic Hollywood, give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic deep dives like this one.